Now, our next speaker, I know a lot of you are familiar with. He is a political cartoonist. He is an illustrator. He's an occasional author, is what he calls himself. And I happen to know that he is a favorite of a lot of you, his Alice and Snark editions. So Chris Riddell, why don't you unmute and say hello to your adoring fans?
Well, I'll say hello. I'm not sure how adoring these fans might be, but I think this is just, I'd like to begin by just saying this is the perfect medium to discuss all things Lewis Carroll. The Zoom rabbit hole, as we've seen, is an intricate and fascinating place. And I often sort of feel sometimes on Zoom meetings, particularly when you see the little tiles with lots and lots of different people, that I am falling down a rabbit hole, seeing those marvelous things that Alice sees as she descends right down to what will be Wonderland. Fascinating to sort of learn about the sort of watery nature of the sort of Lewis Carroll thought on this. Always interesting. I loved the idea of Alice, and this is my Alice, based on Alice Liddell, who listened to the original stories told on that Oxford riverbank, based on the photographs that Lewis Carroll took, or Charles Dodson, rather, to give him his real name, took of the little sisters. There is Alice with her characteristic dark bob in a pool of her own tears, which I think is just a fascinating thought, psychologically, swimming in your own tears. But my favorite part of that episode is the notion of how to get dry. And the mouse comes up with the idea that in order to sort of get dry, you should listen to a very, very dry story. Beset, as you sort of sit on the bank of your own tears, you can listen to a story. And this is one of my illustrations from my edition of Alice in Wonderland, of the mouse recounting the tales of usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. Ugh, said the lorry with a shiver. I beg your pardon, said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. Did you speak? Not I, said the lorry hastily. I thought you did, said the mouse. I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable to... So you see, it doesn't work. You don't get dry that way. Alice sees through it. You've got to do something much, much more interesting, like the caucus race. And this is my little interpretation of a very dry Mercian bishop right there. After I had illustrated the Alice in Wonderland, I think I felt contractually obliged to illustrate Through the Looking Glass. I've had so much fun sort of rediscovering the much loved story from my childhood. And I remember being completely obsessed by the White Rabbit from Wonderland, appearing as depicted by the great John Tenniel. And Alice looks up, and there is this extraordinary rabbit in a waistcoat looking at his pocket watch. And I was obsessed with John Tenniel's illustration, and I would study it. And I would study it very carefully to sort of just work out how this extraordinary illustrator managed to convey a rabbit with so much sort of personality and characterization, and the way that he could actually find the detail in the folds of the crook of an arm and an umbrella just perched in that crook, and the folds and creases in the top coat and the way the pocket watch has emerged from a waistcoat. And I would draw and draw and draw, copying these tenniel illustrations. And I discovered things like this sort of the power of the crosshatch. I'm using a soft pastel pencil at the moment just because it's nice and easy to draw with. But I loved the intricate crosshatch that only years later I realized was the work of the Dial brothers, who were the master engravers of the age, and they would take Tenniel's drawings and transfer them onto wooden blocks to make these intricate engravings that could then be sort of printed. And I was fortunate enough many years ago to be taken on a tour of the vaults of Macmillan Publishers, and a drawer was opened, and out of this drawer came the original wooden blocks with the engraved images that one knew so well, engraved in them, ready to be sort of typed, set in at the printers, you know, with the type around them. These were absolutely extraordinary objects to look at, and really sort of had that sort of authentic sort of whiff of Victorian illustration. And so many years later, when I came to illustrate Alice in Wonderland, the very first illustration that I did, really just to sort of go down memory lane, was the illustration that opens the book, which is the White Rabbit looking at his pocket watch, about to disappear down the rabbit hole. I also did another little exercise, I'll just show you this very quickly, of imagining the architecture of Wonderland, which is an amorphous place, dreamlike in many ways. But I just wanted to know, in a sense, how it might be laid out. So up in the sort of corner here, we have the corridor where the sort of pool of tears forms. And Alice swims through her tears onto this little beach where the Caucus race takes place. And then she proceeds past various landmarks. So we have the White Rabbit's house situated here. And if you follow this path down here, we have the courthouse and the Queen of Hearts croquet lawn. Over here, we have a little doorway, which Alice from the hall can't quite get through, so she looks through into this landscape. She sees all sorts of the rose garden. Over here we have the Hatter's house and the Duchess's house and the March Hare's house. So these are all sort of places, and at the March Hare's house is the famous tea party with the Dormouse and the Hare and the Hatter. And over here, one of my favorite scenes is the Mock Turtle's rock on the beach, where the Griffin takes Alice to meet the Mock Turtle. So it was a fun sort of thing to just lay out the sort of architecture, I suppose, of Wonderland. So when I moved on to illustrate through the looking glass, I sort of felt on a bound to maybe to attempt something similar in this book. So when I began, the first thing I did was attempted to map out the looking glass land. So we have the Tulgey Wood down here, the Tulgey Wood. It's set out like a chessboard. We've got the looking glass house, from which Alice sort of steps through the mirror into this environment. She goes up Looking Glass Hill to meet the Red Queen. She then takes the train, finds herself in Tweedle's Wood, where she meets Tweedledum and Tweedledee. She then moves on to the sheep shop and Humpty Dumpty's wall. And so I sort of went through all these different sort of environments, trying to sort of put them in what I felt might be the an interesting location. Over here we have Walrus Beach, where the walrus and the carpenter walk along and decide how many maids it would take to mop up all the sand on the beach as they move towards their feast of oysters. And in this book, I discovered as I was going through something sort of interesting that made me think there might be sort of maybe some speculative fiction that that could lead on from the world of the Looking Glass. And I call this the Thursday Hippopotamus, and I would just like to read a little piece that refers to this extraordinary character. Which reminds me, the White Queen said, looking down and nervously clasping and unclasping her hands, we had such a thunderstorm last Tuesday. Humpty Dumpty saw it too, the White Queen went on in a low voice, more as if she were talking to herself. He came to the door with a corkscrew in his hand. What did he want? Said the Red Queen. He said he would come in, the White Queen went on, because he was looking for a hippopotamus. Now, as it happened, there wasn't such a thing in the house that morning. Is there generally? Alice asked in an astonished tone. Well, only on Thursdays, said the Queen. So the Thursday, this is Humpty with his corkscrew, but the Thursday hippopotamus intrigues me as a character. Here I've drawn him in his frock coat. And particularly the mystery of why Humpty Dumpty with his corkscrew actually wants a meeting with the Thursday hippopotamus. There could well be some sort of story linked with that. And as I was sort of waiting to sort of talk to you, I drew a quick Thursday hippopotamus with Humpty Dumpty in the background as I ruminated on what the story behind this wonderful Victorian aquatic mammal might be. Who knows? Who knows? I also wanted to show my edition of Hunting of the Snark. And again, because I have a little sort of theory. I mean, not a little bit like sort of, discovering the Thursday hippopotamus. In The Hunting of the Snark, this is sort of, I've always loved this this poem. I've loved the sort of nonsense aspect of it. And I was sort of fortunate enough to be asked to illustrate The Hunting of the Snark. And here we have the crew, which rather wonderfully, the crew all begins with, they're all tradespeople who have the letter B as their sort of, their trade. There's the boots, the bonnet maker, the billiard marker, the broker, the barrister, the butcher, the banker, the beaver, and of course the bellman. And this intriguing figure, who I feel is the hero of, or I would possibly say heroine of this story, the baker. And in my reading of the Hunting of the Snark, the baker, I make a case for the baker sort of having joined this all-male, defiantly all-male crew under false pretenses. She appears, I think, at the beginning as we're introduced to the baker. The baker, we're told, has 42 boxes all carefully packed with his name painted clearly on each. But since he omitted to mention the fact, they were all left behind on the beach. Very convenient. The loss of his clothes hardly mattered, because he had 7 coats on when he came, with 3 pairs of boots. But worst of it was, he had wholly forgotten his name. I don't believe that for a minute. I think this figure, the baker, is in disguise. There's a convenient story of losing his luggage. I don't believe that, with his name on, and he's forgotten his name. I love this line. He would joke with hyenas, returning their stare with an impudent wag of the head. And he once went for a walk, paw in paw with a bear, just to keep up its spirits, he said. There he is, going for a walk with the bear. So my contention is that he is, he's joined the crew. He is, in fact, in disguise. Here he is again. That is clearly a false beard. That capacious hat will hide wonderful sort of Victorian hair, luxuriant hair. And of course, at the end of the book, during the hunting of the Sark, we meet we have a reprise of meeting various figures. At the end of the book, the baker is the one that discovers the Snark and waves to the others. He's on a distant peak and he waves to the others, and unfortunately, he disappears. And they sort of hear a faint sigh as he disappears. And the contention as they look for him and they can't find him, that in fact, rather than the Snark, the baker has discovered a boojum. And a boojum, you disappear if you discover a boojum. It's a very bad thing. And my thought was that, in fact, the baker didn't disappear. This is not a tragedy. It's more a love story. And the baker throws off her disguise and lives happily ever after with the boojum, who, in fact, far from being fearsome, is a gentle custodian of this endangered, flightless bird, the Snark. And they set up a little sanctuary on the island where bellmen and people with names beginning with B aren't welcomed. And they live happily ever after. For the Snark was a boojum, you see. So a little bit of thought on Thursday hippopotamuses and on boojums and snarks. And as a children's illustrator and an occasional author, I only write books in order to do the pictures. So my books tend to have lots and lots of illustrations in them because, quite frankly, they fill up plenty of space, and it means I don't have to write so many words. And this is my latest book, A Mermaid's Diary. And here is a mermaid. And having shown you the Wonderland maps, I need to show you a map at the beginning of this book. And this has a few sort of places that are references to my love of Lewis Carroll's books. And so here there is Boo and Moo's nests. And Boo and Moo, Boo is a griffin and Moo is a mock turtle. And this is where they live. They have some nests above the Drowsy Cliffs, just above Drowsy Bay. Behind them is the Bulgy Wood, a little reference maybe to the Tulgey Wood, but this one is bulgy. And this is the Sleepy Cove where the mermaid lives, a quiet life in Sleepy Cove, disturbed when one day some developers come and they want to develop it. But here, I just thought I'd share a few sort of pages. As you see, you can save a lot of writing just with a few judicious illustrations. This is my mermaid, Atalanta, describing growing up. She was taught by an old tortoise in mock turtle style. And here is the tortoise saying, "I hope you're keeping up with your reeling and writhing, Atalanta." Here they are. Mermaid babies are kept together in shoals on the end of silk threads. So they're being taken for a walk by their tortoise. And here we have Atalanta's fitness routine. Reeling and writhing was my favorite subject at school. It keeps you fit and is a good training for walking, because this mermaid, instead of swimming, humans swim as a sort of a sport. Well, mermaids walk as a sport. So here is Atalanta keeping up her fitness routine, writhing, complicated exercises for strengthening your tail muscles, and reeling, swimming round in circles extremely fast with a partner. And as I say, this idyll of Sleepy Cove is disturbed by these two, the walrus and the carpenter, turn up. They're property developers. They want to turn Sleepy Cove into some sort of hideous Donald Trump golf resort. And they are going to develop it. Here is the walrus. He's wearing his kings and cabbages waistcoat. And here we have a little meeting of Moo and Boo, the griffin and the mock turtle, with Atalanta. They're doing one of their favorite things, which is sitting on rocks and looking out at the ocean. And they have, in true Lewis Carroll style, a conversation. So again, in a sort of Lewis Carroll sense, what is the point of a book without good conversation and pictures? So this is a book with lots of conversations and pictures in it, with more than a passing reference to the great and wonderful Lewis Carroll, which is why we're gathered together in this particular rabbit hole to talk about all things Lewis Carroll. Thank you for listening to my ramblings, less academic possibly, but sort of heartfelt. And I would love to know if there are any questions that I can answer in a visual way.
Why, yes, I think there are. And at some point, we'd love to see your face as well, Chris. I know that's possible there. And
Well,
by the way, everyone... Oh,
it
go ahead.
certainly is. Now here I am. And just for sort of, proof of life.
All right, fair.
Yeah. In my studio. This is my own little sort of, refuge away from the world. Yes, this is where I write, I illustrate, I hide from the world. It again feels like a certain type of rabbit hole. And what I really enjoy about working, this is an old converted coach house, and it's very quiet unless I'm doing things like this, and then the neighbor takes out his chainsaw and starts to trim the trees and things, which was happening just a few minutes before we started. It never fails but usually it's nice and quiet.
And right as he said that, a siren goes by where I am. Go figure. I would like to say, everyone, that I didn't even know. Well, I knew that Chris had a new book out about mermaids, but it didn't really occur to me what a perfect follow-up you were then to our water enchantment talk. Like, who knew?
That was fascinating. Yes, absolutely fascinating.
And we do have some questions in the Q&A here. One, I think, was actually for Anna, right? Till, does a caterpillar and his hookah have psychological importance to you? Water pipe have psychological importance to you? I'm guessing that was for Anna.
Possibly, but I'd like to answer that.
Please do.
Absolutely. Yes, obviously the smoking of a hookah with the bubbling of the water sort of speaks to the Victorian notion of deep fear of the gurgle. It's you can cross-reference this in a number of learned journals that explain exactly what the gurgling sound means, from everything from the Rhine maiden myths to Orientalism that came. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. I apologize.
I was just going with it. I was just nodding. I was gonna let you go land wherever you were gonna land. Quick question. Ellie Lushinsky is wondering, was the Bellman inspired by John Cleese?
In some ways, characters sort of find their way into my drawings. So very possibly, being a great Monty Python fan and growing up with Monty Python, John Cleese and his amazing sort of silly walks and things. And I think he would make an excellent bellman. So very possibly, yes. I think I once did a series of books about the daughter of a famous Regency poet involving a 300-year-old vampire. And my wife gently pointed out, once this book was delivered and illustrated, that the 300-year-old vampire was the spitting image of my friend Sylvia. I had no knowledge of this. This was just a complete sort of accident. did have to gently sort of say to Sylvia, you do know I've accidentally put you in one of my books. Luckily, she didn't mind too much.
The accidental vampire.
Absolutely.
Now, Arnold Hirschon has a question that's actually kind of similar to one I had. I was wondering if you ever find something just really difficult to draw because it just seems so natural for you. I'm imagining you as a baby instead of grasping onto people's fingers, like grasping onto graphite pencils. Arnold Hirschon is wondering what was the illustration in the Alice books that you found to be the most challenging? Like,
Now,
anything ever challenging for you? It just comes out of you.
well, it's interesting. I mean, as a very young child, I enjoyed sort of crayons and pencils and making pictures and stuff. But what I was one of those rather sort of unsettling children who stare at things. So I did have a rather inscrutable, unblinking. I wanted to know how things worked. I wanted it was all visual for me, sort of staring. My father was a vicar in the Church of England. And I remember one time, and this is recounted to me, and I have a vague memory of it, as a very young child of about sort of 3, I think. I was fascinated by an elderly lady who had very, very thin legs and stockinged legs and a long sort of dark skirt. So when she came to have tea with my parents, tea with the vicar, I lay on the sitting room carpet and attempted to stare up her skirt to see where these strange thin legs connected. I just wanted to know how that worked. So yes, I always looked at things. And I think that later transferred into, I suppose, a visual uh, memory for things. But I think, to answer the question, I actually found the most difficult illustration was actually the iconic scene of the tea party, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And the reason I found that difficult was I loved the Hatter so much, the iconic sort of illustration, the Tenniel illustration. And I just didn't want to repeat a sort of rather less convincing version of the Tenniel Hatter. So I came up with this in a sort of, Wonderland style. I decided to make my Hatter obviously a female, rather glamorous, almost the opposite of the traditional Hatter. And hopefully not like Johnny Depp at all. That's the only reference I'll make to those movies. And it sort of, worked in some ways, just for me, because it meant that my Hatter wasn't the same as the wonderful, iconic John Tenniel Hatter.
Well, I mean, I love the original takes on the characters, the female Hatter and like the Boojum as Boo Radley. Basically, that's just amazing to me. Brian Sibley is wondering, although he's got something to say before my question, you need to know that you are the embodiment of Alice's statement about pictures and conversations. And the question is, how was your interpretation of The Hunting of the Snark published as it was by Carroll's original publisher, Macmillan? I guess I'm confused by the question. How was your interpretation of The Hunting of the Snark? I guess, did you feel like you were competing with Carroll since it was the same publisher?
No, I think, and I know Brian well, and Brian is a fantastic sort of Lewis Carroll scholar.
Oh, yes.
And in fact, is one of the reasons I'm talking to you today, because Brian very gently gave me a nudge and said I hadn't replied to your very polite email. I had to go back and find it. I think we had that. Always delighted to sort of, talk Lewis Carroll with Brian. And I suppose the question with the Hunting of the Snark was this sort of notion of sort of, this was the edition, the original edition was illustrated not by the great John Tenniel. And so in some senses, the illustrations were very different in the original. But I felt mainly that the format spoke to me. I wanted it to be a very sort of friendly book. I love the sort of the cadence of the verse. It's lovely and formal and has sort of beautiful lines in it. And really, I wanted to sort of people the whole thing with the weird and the wonderful. And I love the way that, in a way, the Snark is a bridge. It has characters from Through the Looking Glass, from the Jabberwocky, appearing in it, and you get that real sense of a Lewis Carroll world that, you know, these stories maybe could all merge together, and one could be both in Looking Glass and next door in Wonderland and on the island of the flightless Snark. And these are the strange creatures that came out to look at the beaver and the butcher who get lost. And this is the beaver with his portfolio of ink and pens that he's brought. And
oh, look at that one. And I apologize, I did mangle Brian's question. There was a part 2. How was it received? How was your Snark book received?
It was received, I think, in various circles. I don't sort of I think there were some kind reviews. And I suppose the only thing one can sort of say for certain is it's still in print, so it is available. So I think received as well as anything can be.
Excellent. And I know it's received very, very well amongst this group. In fact, Ella Benches says she would love to buy some Alice illustrations. She already has the books, but do you sell any prints? She's wondering.
It's interesting. I haven't yet, but I am just about to have an exhibition at my home in Brighton. It's something called the Open House Festival. It's part of the May Festival in Brighton, where I live. And I'm going to be selling some drawings and things there. But what I think I would like to do with my Lewis Carroll illustrations, the Snark and Through the Looking Glass, and is maybe give them to the British Museum or somewhere like that, so that they can be sort of put in some collection, kept together. I think that would be rather fun. If that doesn't sound too grand, it's something I'd rather enjoy doing.
I think it's just the right amount of grand. Yeah, I was wondering what you do with these reams of paper, because I mean, it must take up so much space, all of your sketches. If you always go at this pace, I guess you're probably not doing this when you're just sitting around your house, maybe.
I'm afraid I am all the time, and I am surrounded by paper everywhere, and I have these wonderful, I would almost argue, Victorian pieces of furniture called architect's drawers, and they are sort of wonderfully sort of big wooden oak sets of drawers, and that's where I keep the artwork that I do. And when I began, I decided I wasn't going to sell original artwork. I'd keep all the artwork together. So I have masses of this stuff. And of course, I started many years ago when we didn't have things like sort of Apple computers and scanners and things that would, so I couldn't, obviously work digitally, and I never have done. So everything I do is analog. It's on paper. It's watercolor, ink and watercolor, and pencils. And I then deliver these things to my publishers. And I love to actually meet young designers who look at me with absolute sort of look at me aghast and go, "You mean you don't do this digitally? This is actual artwork?" And I rather sort of shamefacedly confess that I do. And then they get very excited because they don't see artwork anymore. They only see digital files. So I'd like to say I am so unfashionable. I've now become fashionable again. It's
Absolutely.
one of those revolutions.
Came back around. And actually, Stephanie is wondering what kind of pencil that is you're waving around.
This is a Conte pastel pencil. And it's an H, which means it's reasonably sort of hard for pastel pencils. They come in all sorts of softness, and this is good because I can sharpen it to sort of a point, which is useful. And I use this really when I'm doing this sort of thing, when I'm talking and drawing, for an audience, because it's very, very sort of forgiving. It's a very quick way to draw and sketch. And when I'm, for instance, sort of drawing for musicians, I sometimes set up a projection and I will draw for a quartet or a folk group. And I'll draw each song very, very quickly with one of these pencils, generating even more pieces of paper as I go.
All right, one more question, and then we've got to get to our next talk, although don't worry, Mike J is not actually sitting there waiting. I had to pre-record him. He wasn't able to be there today, but so we will be playing the video of my interview with him in just a moment. But Matt Demakos is wondering, do you always draw this fast, or when you're actually illustrating a book, does it take more time?
It's an interesting one. No, I was very, very, and I suppose still am very, very sort of taken with detail. I love sort of detailed illustrations. And so if I can sort of lose myself in endless sort of detail, pen and ink drawings. So the drawings in Mermaid's diary are fairly sort of fairly detailed and cross-hatched and sort of, you know, take me lots and lots of time to do, because I enjoy the sort of, you know, the detail there. But this is a guide to seahorses. I think we need guides to seahorses with notes. And this is a seahorse on a page all by itself, and no words at all. This is what you can do when you write this stuff. You can just say, right, I'm having no words on this page. So I do love that. But actually, to answer the question, I now have learned a rather sort of valuable lesson. And this is the one bit of wisdom I'd like to impart to you. And it's very useful, I think, for maybe sort of young artists to hear this. The key to what I do is that I don't make mistakes. And that's very important, that I don't make mistakes. So when I do a particularly poor drawing with sort of, you know, misjudged anatomy and terrible proportions, I just pretend I meant to do it that way. You see, so that suddenly, you know, means
What a great outlook on life.
Yes, you just escape a sort of all sorts of sort of terrible pain by saying, no, actually, I meant to do that rather awkward drawing. That's my style. And it's that letting go. I think I spent my entire career just slowly letting go from sort of this need to control and to, you know, pin down the world visually. And now I'm very, very happy to, and I'm just drawing my younger self. And this was a seminal moment in my very, very early career.
Oh.
And this was in a vicarage in North Yorkshire. I like to think of it sort of as, you know, next door to the Brontes parsonage. But anyway, my father was a vicar up in Yorkshire where it rains a lot. And I remember one very rainy afternoon, I'd taken sort of possession of some lovely crayons. And I had a lovely, lovely afternoon, I remember, scribbling all over my father's study walls in crayon. And that was very expressive. And of course, I got into terrible trouble when my father found out what I had done. You know, and he made sure, and so my parents both made sure that I had lots and lots of paper and lots of pencil everywhere that I was. I had things to draw on that weren't walls. So I've learned in a way, you know, this progression to just sort of gently let go and not be too worried about the outcome. And I think that means that one can draw rather faster than when it's required.
I think that is a lovely note to end on. By the way, I meant for my power to go out today. I wanted to challenge myself to scramble and host. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me there, but I think that's a lovely sentiment. There are no mistakes.
Have a Starbucks mural behind you. I'm rather sort of taken with that.
That's my virtual background. I actually made it to a friend's house, everyone, thank goodness. So had to go a little far south to get power, but here I am. Chris, I want to thank you so much. It's been a goal of mine to have you on one of our events for so long. And thank you to Brian Sibley for that wonderful introduction that maybe helped sway you a little bit. Thank you so much for being here, and again for being a trooper with all my technical difficulties.
It's been my absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted I was able to enter this particular rabbit hole.
Excellent. Yes, it is a rabbit hole for sure. Thank you so much.